I will, wait a moment. Okay, this is the specific research area. And that is in the area of investigation on the river basin of the Quebrada Chayap in the department of Ancash in northwest of Peru. This is located in the Peruvian Andes and extends from the mountain Nevado San Juan in the east to the edge of the city in Huaraz in the west. The entire area is thus located in the high mountains and altitude over 3,000 meters above the sea level, and the river is mainly fed by the San Juan Glacier. The settlements in this studio area are small rural settlements which live almost exclusively from small-scale agriculture. In addition, the region is economically characterized by tourism and mining. And this is a prototype for a human environment system, which was particularly well suited for this research. The data used in this work covers the period 2002 until 2012. The objective is divided in three target dimensions: social, environmental, and scientific, which I would like to explain briefly. Social goals: the local knowledge of local residents and their perceptions are part of the analysis and the modeling process and serve to identify the relevant factors of vulnerability. Environmental goals: from a systemic perspective, the relationship to equally socioeconomic and environmental factors of influence take place here, linking numerical and linguistic variables. The perception of problems regarding of observed weather phenomena and environmental changes will be considered from a local perspective, and a general discussion will be simulated. By scientific goals, this work makes a new contribution to vulnerability research, because this model was developed that describes a dynamic socio-ecological system, and this will be done with a local perspective. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Social vulnerability, I want to describe what we meant here. The social vulnerability is understood as a characteristic of a person or group defined by a variety of relationships between society and the environment, which can significantly affect the lifestyle of those affected in a negative way. Four perspectives of different authors of vulnerability are emphasized: non-linearity, affectness, time and space dependency, and objectivity. Objectivity here is the result from individual life circumstances and the varying degrees of affectness of the person or group under consideration. The cultural or personal imprint of the researcher also play a role in the investigation of social vulnerability. Objectivity is therefore a requirement that is very difficult to achieve, since vulnerability is always based on a subjective interpretation. Vulnerability, as I said, is a characteristic that is clearly subjective. It is here therefore understood as a subjective process. The integration of local knowledge is an important conceptual part of this research. In their selection, it is not their academic education or expertise that plays a role, but their personal life experience. Examples are representative chairpersons of irrigation committees in this region, who are local knowledge and decision makers in relation to water resources. In this, they are referred to as local experts in this work. Local knowledge is a non-mensurable methodological concept. In my work, I use different scale levels. It was necessary because no data for the selected variable was available for the specific area under investigation. At the level of the much larger and very heterogeneous districts of Huaraz and Independencia, only limited data of the population was available. However, this data was not relevant for the variable considered. Only at the department level were more or less complete data series available for the variables, and for the entire period until 2005 and 2012. To the difficulty of obtaining data for the local level, it was necessary to use data at the department level. The socioeconomic data was put in relation to the national level in order to consider ratios rather than real numbers. This is also clearly the principle of regionalization or downscaling of data. At this point, I would like to emphasize that this work was mainly concerned with the development and testing of the model. It was not concerned for a number exactly precise. It was more in, I wanted to research and to look for tendencies in this case. Silvio is a methodology developed by myself to analyze social vulnerability in connection with climate or environmental variables. Silvio stands for social vulnerability order methodology, where order stands for the weightiness and hierarchy applied. With Silvio, for the first time, a model is created that uses local knowledge to select and weight the variables used in a modeling. The methodology thus combines quantitative data with qualitative evaluations. The added value of this methodology is the handling and integration of this qualitative information with methods of fuzzy logic. By applying the expert tone, and an index is created. This diagram shows an schematic representation of the procedure that describes the Silvio methodology. This is summarized in a total of 6 individual steps. That is the first step. First, a pilot survey with 15 experts interview was conducted in Lima. The aim of this was to identify the variables that are important for the research questions. The interviewed experts came from environmental authorities, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, or development cooperation projects, and all had a special knowledge of the wider region under investigation. The first questionnaire was an open questionnaire to obtain information about the living situation of the population and about problems, and to understand the status quo of the system in the region. The result of this first survey can be considered as the first classification of the variable describing the system under investigation. A second survey was then conducted on the site in the settlements in the studio. This is the area along the Quebrada Shaya. This second survey consisted of a total of 10 interviews with local knowledge carriers such as authority, local leaders, and chairmen of the local irrigation committees. An open questionnaire was also used as an interview guide, as the interviews were mostly conducted with the help of a translator, because the people spoke the local language, this is Quechua. As a result of this survey of local knowledge carriers, 6 weighted variables were identified as representative variables for the system under study. These are mining, tourism, agriculture, migration, illiteracy, and health. The socio-economic variables were weighted by the experts on a scale of 0 to 10, as represented above. Thus, 6 variables were defined. These were used to structure the expertone. The selection of the environmental variable was done in a first step for the orientation through research in the evaluation literature. In the end, it followed the comments of local experts. In the open interviews, they mainly mentioned phenomena related to the temperature and precipitation, such as hot spells, drought, heavy rainfall. Again, due to the lack of data available at the local level, the information at department level was used. The second step. In this step, the results of the weightings from the survey are transferred into a matrix. The weightings were rated on a scale from 0, not at all, to 10, completely. This step serves as the basis for the calculation of the expert tone. I want to talk that this is the methodology. The expert tone means to transfer the result of the interviews into the model. It starts with the weighting explained in the previous slide. Then follows the content of the frequency of the evaluation for each variable. Then the values are divided by the number of experts. This gives the normalized frequencies. And ended with the cumulative complementary fertility functions. And at the end, the complementary distribution function is calculated. And this gives the matrix of the complement to 1. This matrix was named by Gila Luja an expert tone. That is what we mean, that is an expert tone, where all the meaning of the expert were in a matrix, were put on a matrix. That is also the step 3. What is the purpose of determining the confidence level? To determine the contribution of each variable to the model, it means to the equation of the social vulnerability indicator SVI. The coefficient CI ultimately express the aggregate assessment of the local expert. The confidence level describes the certainty of these values to the coefficient. In the present case, the confidence level alpha equal to 0.5 was chosen since it is the highest confidence level on which all variables prioritized by the experts are represented. In alpha 0.6, that is a level of higher certainty, 60%. The variables migration, health, and illiteracy will not be included in the calculation of the SVI. At the confidence point 4, all variables will be represented, but with less certainty, namely only 40%. The selection of the confidence level is a decision of the research. It was made a normalization where here each individual value is divided by the mean value. The goal of this calculation is to obtain coefficients for the construction of the index, which consists of values between 0 and 1. The sum of all normalized values of the coefficients must be equal to 1, because together they make the entire of the indicator. In the lowest table, the standardized coefficients are ordered by their values in descending order. Is it in order words mining, LCM stands here for large-scale mining, has the largest contribution of all variables to the SVI, which is a value of 0.348, followed by the variables tourism, agriculture, migration, illiteracy, and health, with decreasing importance. Step 4. By the step 4, here is the equation for the calculation the social vulnerability index SVI. It consists of 6 variables, each multiplied by the calculated and standardized weighted coefficients. The equation is an algebraic sum. In general, it can be said that it's an additive model or additive index. As already explained, the coefficients indicate the contribution of each variable to the overall index. In the calculation of the experts on expert assessment are aggregated in not as in usual the case, a simple average is formed. This is a fundamental difference in the methodology presented here. Each of the variables thereby maintain its proportional relationships to the overall index, and the SBI simultaneously establishes an additive relationship between the variables. This does not mean that the influence of the variables or vulnerability is always positive, but that all elements add up to the overall index. The actual values with those individual variables for the regarded periods into the index flow can be thereby positive or negative. The climatic variables considered are temperature and precipitation. The temperature variable is computed by the average annual maximum temperature of the department of Ancash in degrees Celsius. The annual average is calculated from the 12-month average of the maximum temperature, and this is formed from the daily maximum temperature. The difference between the main values of the annual maximum temperatures for the whole department of Ancash and for the investigated region are relatively small, and therefore the values were not processed further. The variable precipitation is used as annual precipitation total in millimeter per square meter. In this case, if this variable, the difference between the values of the annual precipitation for the whole department of Ancash were larger compared to the studied region. This is due to the fact that Ancash not only includes mountainous regions, but also extends to the Pacific coast of Peru. The precipitation varies greatly over the large area of the department. Therefore, the average value for the three departments, Huánuco, Cajamarca, and Ancash, in my case, which are mainly located in the Andes, represented the values of the study area better than the simple value of the department Ancash. And this is the step 5, and we see typing refers to the search for similarity between objects. The variables examined here differ greatly in their units in order of magnitude. That means, for example, percentage of illiteracy to million of Peruvian soles, the national currency of Peru. For the added value from mining, in order to process such different data sets, all original data of the socioeconomic variable were put into relation to superordinate data. For example, valued added for mining for Ancash in relation to the gross domestic product of Ancash, or tourist arrivals in Ancash in relation to arrivals of tourists in Peru. So in this way, we form these coefficients, dimensionless values between 0 and 1. And so we're obtaining which can be worked with more easily form. For the final step, we have a method. The final step of the methodology is a correlations analysis between SBI and the two climate variables. For this purpose, the Pearson correlation coefficient is calculated, which assumes values between 0 and 1, where a high value means a high correlation, so we know. The correlation indicates the influence of each climate variables on social vulnerability. In this last step, the socioeconomic dimension of vulnerability is thus linked to the environmental variables. This is the result of the model calculation of Silvio. Is represented in the form of three curves, SBI, temperature, and precipitation. The graph shows an illustration of the behavior and tendency of social vulnerability in comparison with the selected climate variables. As can be seen, the SBI rises steadily from 2005 to 2009 and then oscillates at a more or less constant level, or even decreases slightly. The climate variables show large fluctuation from year to year, reflecting the high variability that characterizes the weather in the Peruvian Andes. However, the aim is not to discuss and interpret the exact progression of the curve, but above all to show the presentation of the result that will be achieved when the Silvio methodology is applied. It was made a validation and was validated with 3 different confidence levels with a calculation of the SVI, and was used another different expert group. I will explain it more further after the conclusion. Silvio established a methodology based on fuzzy logic for the aggregation of evaluations and variables of different types, linguistic, numerical. Silvio captures social vulnerability by an index SVI, whose variables were selected and weighted by residents of the study area, thus integrating local knowledge. Despite the challenge of finding consistent local data for condition analysis in the Quebrada Chayap area, the methodology allows to obtain results even with few data. This is an advantage of the methodology. Silvio provides a clear and easy to understand illustration of the behaviors and tendencies of social vulnerability, enables trend analysis, and allows a quick diagnosis of the system status. Thank you for your attention, and I don't know how was with the time.
Yes, thank you, Thijs. I think the presentation was very interesting, with lots of methodological details. I would first like to ask if anyone has a question for Thijs.
Thijs, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, right.
Did you have a lot of difficulties finding stakeholders to want to be part of your interviews in the local communities?
No, that was not the problem. They were very open to do with, because in this region, they also have many problems with the government. And in the fact, as I was there, I cannot say I was watching or looking for or researching in the way of climate change, because climate change was a very difficult theme to talk with them. They don't want to know about people who say we are researching about climate change. Because in the past they had a lot of problem with the government, and in that way I say I want to know what do you mean, what is important to you, and in this way they were very open to do with, to communicate, and they show a lot of interest. It was not a problem. Do I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. I was also wondering, did you come back to these people and present the results to them?
Yes, it was. I thought it was planned for this year. I wanted to fly with my tutor, but it was not possible. We were in this situation, and then we said, okay, we come maybe in the future. I'm sure. They were very interesting, and I know not only for the people in this region, they show an interest, but the local government was also very interested in this research. And most of them, they write me emails and say, how was can you tell me about the results of your work? And I want to comment here, after this research in the region, I also do a research with the same methodology but not with local citizens, some with experts for the government. And the results were really, really different, really quite different. I mean, when the local people, it was important that the mining, local scale mining was very dangerous for the environment, for the population. But for the government, they say, no, that is not a problem. The problem is these people, the illiteracy quote is very high. Do I say? Do you say what I mean? I don't know. It was really pronounced. For the government, the main problem is these people are not educated in this tema. That was really was a point that I say, wow. I mean, with this methodology, I found really by different groups from person really quite different interest on the problem to analyze.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for answering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thijs. So we can do two things now. But first, are there any other questions for Thijs?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Thijs, thanks for your talk. I was wondering, do you think that the vulnerability also varies over space, or would you say that your case study is so local that you don't have any spatial variation?
I didn't hear your I didn't hear you. Well, can you please repeat your question?
Yeah, my question is whether the social vulnerability also varies over space in your case study area, or do you think because it's very local that it doesn't vary over space?
Do you mean? I understand really when you say your question is, do you note that the vulnerability was very high in this region?
No, if it's varying over space.
Is this very? I didn't hear what you mean.
Is there any variety in the spatial dimension?
Yeah, does it depends on the location?
Of the social vulnerability depend on this region.
Yeah, on the location. Is it spatially?
Is there any variation within the region?
In this region, is the social vulnerability very high. All this is local. I only take this region in the near of this river, because this is an important river for this population in my research area. But in this quiet region, social vulnerability reach a very, very, very high point, because this population is very dependent on the glaciers. And the climate change, the glaciers of these regions are very affected. And this is why I could not take all the process from climate change. So I only take two variables that was important for the region. But all this region is very under the pressure of this climate change process. And the social vulnerability is really high for all of the region. Was that your question?
Okay, so you say that it's homogeneous over the whole region.
So I say?
So the answer was no, thank you.
Yeah, I think so.